Good morning and good afternoon to you wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Sepaban, CEO of our office, where we help organizations with the process, the expertise, the data and technology you need to build a more inclusive workplace. Our end-to-end solution for workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion works especially well for small and medium organizations who want to focus on DEI. But we found that they may be too stretched this time of the year, especially, or in general, for resources and budget and so on. I'm truly honored today to talk about DEI with retired Marine Lieutenant General Lori Reynolds. Lori graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and is only the third woman to earn the rank of Lieutenant General in the Marine Corps. She has had an incredibly impressive career in the military, including her deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. In September 2015, she assumed command of the Marine Corps Cyberspace Command at Fort Meade. In 2018, Lori was nominated for promotion to Lieutenant General and was assigned as Deputy Marine Corps Commandant for Information and Commander of Marine Corps Forces Strategic Command. Really impressive. She just retired earlier this year in July 2021. So we're incredibly fortunate to have you, Lori. So first, thank you for your service and welcome to our office webinar series.
Sonia, thanks so much. It's really great to be with you here today.
Thank you. So if you agree, I'm just going to give a little bit of information here before we get into the meat of our conversation to make sure everyone is familiar with our webinar tool. This is an interactive webinar. We will have a few polls throughout, so please be ready to give us your inputs there and participate. Also note that there is the chat function here that you can use, and we look forward to your questions and inputs throughout the webinar. We have one of my colleagues at our office, Anushka Sarif, who will be moderating the questions in real time and chiming in as needed. Thanks in advance, Anushka. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end and afterwards if needed, as long as you can provide your email address when you put your questions in the chat. Also, please note this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page, which is at ouroffice.io/events. Last but not least, this webinar was approved for SHRM recertification credits. You will find the activity code for SHRM on the last slide. So let's get started, shall we? I want to start, Lori, with your journey. Please tell us how you became the most senior woman in the U.S. Marine Corps. Where did your interest in serving in the Marine Corps come from, and what were the key moments that shaped your career?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'll just say that nobody's more surprised than me that I, was able to stay in and continue to serve for 35 years. I think, I went to the Naval Academy, as you mentioned, and it was kind of the early days, Sonia, of women at the Academy. And my goal then was I just wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and I visited the place, and I don't think I understood then how much of a opportunity that was, but I just knew that I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. And then when I was there, I was just drawn to the culture of the United States Marine Corps. So, the Marine Corps, part of the Department of the Navy. And so we produce out of the Naval Academy officers for the Navy and the Marine Corps. And so I had the opportunity to go into the Marine Corps in 1986. I was raised as a communications officer in the Marine Corps. And that is to say, not, public communications, but building and operating and maintaining networks for deployed commanders. So that's what I did. It gave me an opportunity to command Marines at all kind of different levels. And that really has been the key to what a successful career looks like for a Marine officer. It's all about, being able to command Marines. And for me, I was really fortunate when it came time to be a battalion commander. My battalion was sent into Fallujah, Iraq, so command in combat as a lieutenant colonel, and then again as a colonel, command in combat in Afghanistan. And just being able to do that, do where, go where your training takes you, build these amazing teams around you and watch them just go do exactly what they came into the Marine Corps to do. And that's, as it turns out, that's what it took to become eligible to become a general officer. And so, I was promoted to brigadier general in 2011. There was one other woman who was senior to me. She was a major general. And when she retired, I found myself as the senior woman in the Marine Corps. So you got to grow up really fast. Just in terms of, I think, moments that shaped my career, it really is about command and having that responsibility to take young Marines and bring them home from a combat situation. It was just an honor to be able to do that for our nation.
Again, just really positive, and thank you for sharing that. As you know, I've had the honor of serving on the civilian side in the government and also working closely with the military throughout my career on the private side. And I will say it's very similar. I think it's a great parallel, as you're saying that I think of for women and all underrepresented people. When we say women, I think throughout this conversation, we want to really include all of the people that have from many, diverse backgrounds, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disabilities, and so on. That find themselves not too many role models, not too many people like them, and wondering what it takes, right, to have a great career and to contribute at the highest levels. And I think on the business side, I would say I always this is something that's not pointed out. I just was lucky enough to happen upon it as well, like you say. The business side is the equivalent of having profit and loss responsibility, P&L responsibility. A lot of times women find themselves in functional roles, which are great. They may manage thousands of people and kind of be on the cost side of the equation, if you will. But the P&L responsibility, profit and loss, is extremely important on the business side. Of course, a lot of times it does involve managing and commanding people as well, but it's commanding resources in general, which, of course, in the case of the services, as you say, is the biggest resource, is the Marines. I know you're passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, you are a cyber expert. You have so much expertise, as you said, your background is in communications, but the diversity, equity, and inclusion is near and dear to your heart in our conversations. You've shared that. How did your focus on DEI come about? I mean, I know we're both women, obviously. Yeah. We have some by our lived experience, but focusing on it as, on a broader scale beyond ourselves, why is it so important to advance DEI in the Marine Corps, or for that matter, in the services in general, which has been historically very male dominated?
Sonia, I think, when you say focus on DEI, what I like to think about is focus on the mission and focus on the people, right? Because to me, this is the part of diversity and equity and inclusion that I think is really not understood as I think it needs to be, is that what we're really talking about is the mission. And we're talking about the people that can best contribute to the mission, right? So for me, here's a story that happened when I was a colonel in command in Afghanistan. I was asked, my commanding general at the time was invited to an event that was in Denmark at the time. It was a symposium on women, peace, and security. And I took with me some members of our female engagement teams. So we had created in Afghanistan, in Iraq, they were called lionesses. In Afghanistan, we called them female engagement teams. And here's what they did. They attached themselves to the ground combat element, the infantry. And these teams, small teams of women, were available to the infantry. And keep in mind, this is 2009, 2010. We had not yet, the ground combat exclusion policy had not yet been lifted. And so technically women were not allowed to be part of the infantry at the time. But what these teams did was they were available to the infantry for security patrols, for intelligence gathering, for anything that that was uniquely required a woman, right? So back then, the Taliban were smuggling, they were dressing like women. They were, they were using women. They were using the fact and their religion as a barrier to our male Marines having access. And so here come these women Marines, and these men would look at them, and it was like, they're not male Marines, but they're not like our women either. They're like something in between. And just the effectiveness of these teams in opening doors, having access to more information, being able to tell the Marine Corps story to these, neutral audiences, it was really incredible. And so being able to take these female engagement team members with me to Denmark for this Women, Peace and Security agenda, that was when that was my big aha moment. Because Sonia, the truth is that most women come into the Marine Corps or perhaps any other service, and it's that whole imposter syndrome, right? It's like, can I be good enough? Am I going to be good enough? Because our history is the Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima, or the Trojan Reservoir, and the toughness, the mental grit, the physicality of the mission. And so as a woman, you just want to contribute. And here was a place where women in particular were adding their own unique value to the mission. It was, to me, it was the whole purpose behind the diversity. And this is, to me, is the language that we should be using. If you want an operationally effective organization, you need every tool in the toolbox. And the Fed example, as we talk through that, and the broader Women, Peace and Security agenda, which says that when you have policies in a country that take care of women and children, then you are less likely to go to war. There's less conflict. The peace is more sustainable. And so isn't that what the military is there to do? Is to provide a sustainable peace. It all came together for me. And it's a long answer to a short question, but I think it kind of gives context for why in the DoD it is so important that we get this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion thing right. It's about the mission, and it's also about taking care of people.
Yes, it's so well said. I really appreciate that. Again, I can think of many parallels in the business world as well, as you focus on the adversary and how, in the services and how they are represented. And obviously, it just seems, when you think of it that way, it seems obvious that we have to be represented on the side of the forces. The same thing goes for business, right? If you're not just providing goods and services to half the population. In fact, women, it's known that are the biggest factor, over 80% of the buying power, generally speaking. And so it is important to have that diversity, to think kind of like your customer or your adversary or your audience, whatever the case might be. So given that, as you well know, we have a kind of a simplistic 4-level scoring of maturity of organizations. We have a maturity model that we use for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It looks at, just the different aspects of processes, policies, benefits, and so on. And it goes from just being aware of DEI as a key topic, to being focused on it, being progressive, or being world-class. So where would you score? I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Where would you score, if you care to answer, the services in general, or the Marine Corps, perhaps if that's easier, on the scale of aware, focused, progressive, or world-class?
I think so. The answer is going to be different, I think, for all 6 services now. So when you include the Coast Guard and now the Space Force, I would say that my Marine Corps is probably aware, moving to focused. I know that, for example, there's this realization now in the Marine Corps that we're going to have to age our force a little bit. So for most of the people listening may not know that the Marine Corps is when we say we're the youngest service, that's to say that 2/3 of the Marine Corps, by design, is in its first enlistment. So we do 4-year enlistments. And so when 66% of the force is in its first 4 years of service, so it is intentionally young, physical, highly deployable, highly ready, right? Because we're the nation's 911 force and we're built around the infantry, right? So for all of those reasons, largely speaking, when we have talked in the past about diversity and equity and inclusion, it falls on the backs of the recruiters to say, okay, make sure that we have a diverse force. And so I think there's a portion of the Marine that, the recruiting force is always kind of aware and focused on making sure that we're bringing in a diverse force. I think now, when you have a much more technical military, we know, and the comment out of the Marine Corps just came out with a change that said we're going to have to age the force. We're going to have to retain, because the training is longer, highly technical, and so we're going to have to retain this. Think cyberspace as an example. I commanded our cyber force. It takes 2 years to have a fully trained cyber operator. You can't send them out, 2 years later. That's no money-making business would do that, right? So now, as we're thinking about aging the force, we have to focus more on retaining the force, and that is going to force us to be more focused, and then hopefully, I'm praying, progressive Marine Corps, just thinking harder about how do you take care of the family. I think some of the other services have done really good jobs. Last year, the Navy had something called Task Force 1, where they came up with 58 different action items to kind of improve diversity. Younger services, the Space Force, brand new. We just stood up the Space Force. They have an opportunity to get this right from the beginning, right? So what do you want your Space Force to? You can design your force, not based off of what, how many is enough, right? This is my probably chief concern about how we do it in the Marine Corps is we always say, well, how many are enough? Instead of, what do you want your service to look like and why? If you could just whiteboard what you wanted the Marine Corps to look like based on the mission, what would it look like across your entire range of operations, from engagement to high-end conflict? But we always kind of one off from, what normal is. What normal is in the Marine Corps is the white male. It's that chiseled, and there's a reason for that. But if you turn that question around and said, no, not how many is enough, what do we want it to look like? We would be more focused than I think we are. So it's all about retention, I think, in the future.
Such a great point about being strategic and focusing on retention. We'll come back to that in a moment. Before we do that, I want to put up a poll and kind of ask our audience. So the poll is active now, and you can see there. The question is, where do you think your organization is in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, the maturity of your organization? And again, the 4 options we have here are aware, focused, progressive, or world-class. If you're not sure, that's okay too. You can say you're not sure. The results are coming in, and we see that it's almost equally. Nobody is world-class, which we kind of expect, but a lot of people are aware about, it seems like about a third are focused, about 20% progressive, and about 10% not sure. That number is changing a little bit. It looks like about a third and a third aware and focused. And that's very consistent. That's where we find organizations are typically in that aware and or focused stage, especially when we meet them, of course, and we talk about how we can support them. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. So with that, let us now talk about, let's continue the conversation about the retention. It's with, as you said, with Marine Corps and other services, and also a few highly specialized industries, you have to grow the diversity from within. So it is very important. And so how did you, experience this? Clearly you succeeded in very well in going up the ranks. What was your personal experience as a woman in the Marine Corps and having mentors, and how did you find out what the barriers were and the success factors? Was there a theme around that, or does it just happen? And how do you think that maybe broadly translates in how the Marine Corps tries to retain people of diverse backgrounds, especially to grow them to more senior roles?
I wish that I could say that as I look back on the early years of my career that I feel like there was just so much being in the right place at the right time. I picked a job. I picked communications, as I mentioned, and nobody told me when I picked that job that command would be important. Nobody taught me that as a lieutenant, and I think we're trying to do a better job of that now. But as it turned out, that job for me was just really, really good. Certainly at that time in the Marine Corps for women, and given me those command opportunities, platoon commander, company commander, battalion commander, group commander. But keep in mind, when I came out into the Marine Corps it was 1986, women, we had about 65% of jobs were open to women. You couldn't fly airplanes. You still couldn't go aboard ship. And if you think about 1986, where we were as a nation, it was kind of the end of the Cold War. We weren't in conflict anywhere, but we were certainly out and about with our Navy brothers and sisters, and it was all about being forward deployed with the Navy. That was close to me. That wasn't available to me as a Marine officer, to be on those ships with the Marine formations that were there. Certainly infantry was not open. And so I only say that to suggest that I had no aspirations when I was coming in that I would ever be a general officer, none. I met a female general, General Carol Mutter, when I was a captain, but she was, again, I didn't, I don't know. It just wasn't, I didn't think to dream that big. My goal was to be a commander and to be a good Marine. And after maybe 20 years, maybe I get out and do something else. And then all of a sudden you look around and like, well, you've put together a pretty good career. And people are saying, hey, we need you to stick around. I'll just say this too, Sonia, and it's probably not the question that you asked, but all it really took was one or two people saying, would you stay?
Yeah.
Because we really need you. And it's the little things that kind of keep you invested in an organization. It's not big things, it's little things. It's little people who cared. And I learned that myself as a leader. Just tell somebody that you want them to stay and watch what they'll do for you. So yeah. So some barriers, some policy barriers to me. But what I tried to follow the command track that I thought would be important, and it just worked out for me. And I was single my entire career, so that made it easy for me. Not easy for women who are trying to have children, and so I'm very aware today of how difficult that is for women, and that's one of the areas where I really think we can improve.
It's such a great thing. It often takes a couple of people, right? I remember even back in high school, one of the reasons I went into engineering, of course, my dad, bless his soul, he was an engineer and I always was interested, but I was still, thinking about different things. And I had a teacher who really took note and asked me at that time to go into the equivalent of like AP classes and so on. And then, I when I was in the in the workforce, there were actually some incredible mentors I had early on, and none of them were a woman. They were all men, and they really, I remember one that was just a small thing. This is kind of almost humorous. One of the jobs that I had, I was actually more senior later on. I was a vice president at a major company, and I remember the first day I reported to work, and I just parked. None of the parking spots were marked, so I just parked. And then the second day I just parked again, and of course this was in a very cold area of the country, and I parked the closest I could to the building, right? And the second day, one of my colleagues, another vice president, pulled me aside and said, "Sonia, I don't know if anybody has told you this, but that is reserved for our president." And I said, "Well, it's not marked." And he said, "Well, yeah, but we just know this now." I was the first woman ever in the 50-year history of this great division of a great Fortune 500 corporation, as a woman, and at that level, and or any vice president role, let alone in the C-suite. So it was really funny, and so I've had, and that's a small thing. It seems like almost like humorous, right? But it is an interesting thing. I've always sort of been part of the boys club or girls club or whoever's club. I was always hanging out with everybody. So I like you, I kind of feel like I was lucky because, I love people. I was sociable. I was more extroverted. There's a lot of people who are more introverted or may not be, as you said, have other restrictions. When I had a baby, I was very fortunate to have my mother, who I give her most of the credit for my success in my career. If she were not around when I had to travel to Russia, for example, when we're building the space station with the Russians, I was at NASA, and we had to go there very often. And at that time, my son was very small, and it would not have been possible at all if I didn't have a mother that lived. So I think these things are, but it points out to a bigger thing, right? That it's kind of like a happenstance. It's not intentional. And where you want to be progressive and world class is to take all of these unique needs of different people into account, and to do that systematically and intentionally, versus it just happens that there's some good people and they help people like you and I, do well.
I think that's really the most important point here, right, Sonia, is, as a leader, having people around you, having a safe place where you can, really understand what your team is going through to meet the standard. And one of the things that I try to talk about in the Marine Corps before I left is, the path is not the same for everyone, right? The finish line might look the same, but that path. So for example, in the Marine Corps, we do morning health, we do PT. So the language of our organization, certainly as you're, growing up and as you establish your credibility, is you have to be physically fit. This is what men understand in the Marine Corps. Like, can you hang? Can you make the runs? Can you carry your own gear? Like that's how you establish your professional reputation. And so physical fitness is important to us. So when you have a formation at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and the daycare centers don't open until 6:30, you have to know that your families who have children are doing unnatural things to be there, and so again, 66% of the force is living in the barracks, and they're 19-year-old young men. They don't care. They'll roll out of bed and be there. But if you're at home with a toddler, what do you do with your child? So we have women who are waking up at 3 a.m. to drop their kid off at somebody else's house so they can drop them off at the daycare center that opens up at 6:30, so you can be there in formation at 6 o'clock. You understand? So, but we have leaders that don't understand that there are 3 more steps that somebody else took just to be standing in formation on time. And, waking people up to that is part of the education that's required, you know, in the military. It's like, it's being in the military is different. It's hard. It's a 24/7 responsibility, but family is there too. And so there's nothing in any of our teaching that says, hey, you know, you're leading more than 19-year-old men, you know, right? And so it's just kind of broadening a perspective so that we're not asking for easier. We're not asking for easier. We're asking to just understand that my life is a little bit different than that life over there. And this is what I mean. I think having a more focused or progressive organization isn't really all that hard. It's just listening to people and understanding that not everybody's life is the same.
Yeah.
It's a degree of difficulty is different based on who you are and what your situation is. And that's what leadership has to understand is, you know, it's different for everybody. So sit down and listen. It's a kneecap to kneecap business.
It is really the heart of equity and inclusion, right? Not giving everybody the same, but giving everyone the same opportunity by giving them different things because their needs are different. And that gets to the point of not only how do you retain people, because we know that for women, there is a huge drop off, especially from, you know, STEM fields, for example. We see that women, you know, in high school are certainly, you know, about the same level of interest. When they go into college, now it's getting better, you know, it's not that bad, and in the first years of their career, but then there's this huge drop off, you know, when they get into the mid-level of their career, where there is, of course, childbearing at the time where they're forming families. So the signs are all, you know, obvious out there, and then we wonder why we can't retain women in certain types of jobs. And then also, you know, how can we keep them engaged? I mean, it's hard to keep someone engaged if all day they're worrying. If they're there, but they're worried about, you know, what's going on with their family. You know, they need to take care of whether it's their children, or now I'm seeing myself as we all get older, as you age, then there is family care. You know, there is that area of your parents or older members of the family. And that all, especially during this pandemic, I've seen that it's really befalling the women. I just see it in our own organization and all of our customers. So there's really three challenges, right? There's recruiting, there's retention, and there's engagement. So we're going to put another poll up, if you agree, Lori, to just see what our audience is feeling. You know, in terms of what's the biggest challenge. So, you know, is it, as you can see here, your biggest workforce challenge? Is it recruiting, retention, or employee engagement, especially from a lens of to have, you know, all kinds of different types of people, right? In terms of diversity of backgrounds and just living, frankly, life situations as well. So we can see it's coming in that, I'm glad to see that people recognize that retention is a big issue. We see about 20% of people saying they don't know, or maybe another challenge, but about 40% saying retention is their biggest issue, or maybe it's about a third recruiting, a third retention, and about 15% employee engagement. I really appreciate it. I mean, hopefully this is part of the learning, right? Is all of us learning from Lori and her experiences, but also from each other in these conversations. So again, yeah, it's kind of balancing out here, about 30% recruiting, 38% retention, 15% employee engagement, and about 15% are not sure or they have another challenge. So let us now get back to the conversation, you know, about engagement and so on. How does even the Department of Defense or Marine Corps, for that matter, you know, find out what people are thinking, you know, what's on their mind, you know, what their needs are?
Well, you know, one of the approaches that DoD has always taken is, you know, the surveys, and I think those are somewhat effective. I think people get survey fatigue. You know, recently there have been task forces that have been put together. DoD had a diversity task force after George Floyd. you know, just trying to understand. I think sometimes I think in the military we think that, you know, these societal issues don't really impact us as much as maybe they do. People bring their whole selves to work, and so you know, I saw a lot of activity, you know, that DoD got after. I think, you know, after the challenge that our country went through with the George Floyd killing. As I said, I saw the Navy do something called Task Force One, where they just, you know, from the ground up, what are the things that, where are our blind spots? What are we doing? You know, bringing the team in. And, you know, it's interesting, Sonia, because the thing that I have found just the most powerful thing that any leader can do, and I saw my own, you know, former assistant commandant do this when we had a little bit of a scandal in the Marine Corps with, you know, posting of, you know, bad pictures and things on the internet. It was the assistant commandant was charged with building a task force to kind of figure out how does something like this happen. And, you know, the most powerful thing that he did was he just brought women in and he just listened. He just listened. Tell me about your career. Tell me your stories. Tell me, because there's so many times where you would bring, you know, as a senior woman, I would bring, like, look, here's a dual, you know, military couple, and we're about to separate them by 80 miles, and they're treated as anecdotes. Oh, well, that's just that's not that's not, you know, no, these are people. They're not anecdotes. These are people, and we're about to kind of like make their life a lot harder than it needs to be. But when you have a senior leader like this, the number 2 guy in the Marine Corps, bring in women, enlisted women, officers, and just for weeks at a time, listen to their stories. Number one, it was eye-opening for him. It like charged him up. But the message that sent across the Marine Corps, like every woman in the Marine Corps knew that General Walters listened, was interested in what the lives of women Marines, what is going on out there. It was super powerful. It was just, sometimes you can't take action. Sometimes, you know, there are reasons why you can't change a policy. There's the mission won't allow it. But the fact that you listen matters. And I would just say to the leaders that might be listening, it costs you only your time, but listen. And if you can't meet the needs, then there's a good reason why you can't. But the fact that you took a minute and just heard people out, boy, I just can't say enough about, you know, how General Walters, who's now the president of the Citadel, handled that, because every woman in the Marine Corps knew about it. 33,000 women knew like that somebody cared. So that was just a powerful lesson that I watched I was a 2-star general when that happened, but it wasn't, you know, following up obviously is the hard part, you know, changing the system to kind of meet everyone's needs and make the whole Corps better in our case. But boy, they'll never forget that he listened. So enough on that.
No, that's an awesome story. I really appreciate that. You know, that's one of the things that we actually really focus on. So it really resonates with me. We actually, as you may know, you know, we actually we have software, and it provides a way for all team members to engage. It's kind of like a social chat kind of a platform that they can actually engage in. And it's intentionally, you know, it's focused on workplace culture, diversity and inclusion type of conversations, so people feel comfortable to engage there. And what we found, we call it the CEO effect. In our world, we call it the CEO effect. In your world, we would call it the general effect or the commandant effect, where we started noticing that when the key leader is, you know, engages on the platform and starts, you know, sharing some personal experience, it takes really, like you said, it takes, because, you know, we know that time is really in short supply for leaders, right? Wherever they are, in the government, in the military, in private business. But so to try and make it easier for them, the digital environment doesn't replace certainly, in person, but it can complement it very well, and it can be 24/7. So in real time, a safe environment where everybody can engage. They can be anonymous if they want. We've just seen amazing things happen, and this CEO effect is every time we saw that, across all kinds of organizations, nonprofits, small, large, when a key leader engaged and said something, the level of engagement from others went up, not just 50%, 30%. It went up 10x. 10x. I mean, that's how much people care when a leader says something. It could be something as simple as something that took them 30 seconds. Initially, we didn't know what was going on, so we were just seeing these big spikes, in engagement, and then we noticed that these spikes actually have a tail, so it's not like an instantaneous spike. It goes up and then it stays up. It comes down a little bit the next couple of days, but it stays up for like at least a couple of weeks and going on, so that the next kind of the general level of engagement has been increased, not as much over time. It subsides a little bit, but it still settles at a higher level than before. So when people talk about, historically, the level of employee engagement or, team engagement of any sort, in any type of organization has been stagnant, really right around 30% by, Gartner studies, right, over the last 20 years. And they ask, how do we engage people? There's such a simple solution. Like you said, just spend a little time, show a little interest. And people are going to really, really respond. And then that response, that engagement is real in terms of the impacts on productivity, on higher quality, and just all kinds of good things. Innovation, it correlates with a lot of things. So we have a good question here that's actually been asked here, that, success, we know, they say, we know that success depends on leadership engagement. What do you see as the key differences in leadership now compared to 10 years ago? Where are you seeing success? Today's, what is the characteristics of today's successful leader as compared to 10 years ago?
Well, I guess my answer to that, really, Sonia, would be that it's not necessarily in the difference in leaders, but it's the difference in the workforce. And one of the things that, when I was coming up, I wouldn't have thought to approach a senior leader and say, I want your job. How do I get there? Like, you watch from afar and you take notes, but you wouldn't tag. And today, and I love it, by the way, is, I think the impact of social media, the impact of that just kind of flattening of communications, really forces you as a leader to be, aware through the various echelons of your organization. But I think also the workforce is not afraid to engage with you directly. And that's my observation in the Marine Corps. So when young Marines will reach out to you online and say, hey, ma'am, can you help me with this? Or, hey, would you be my mentor? Or, we shouldn't do that coming up. My peers were my mentors. I think that I also think that, some of it, with regard to, this topic of diversity and equity and inclusion, I think there's a growing awareness that we got to do something different, at least in my Marine Corps. Whether it's the commandant's focused on growing the force and therefore retaining more. So therefore, what do I need to do? What's really happened? Why are people leaving? We didn't even used to ask people why they left. Now we're starting to ask, why are you leaving? So collecting that understanding, I don't know. The leaders that are in the Marine Corps right now, they're my peers. I know them. They're my brothers and sisters. And so, we came up together. We experienced all the same things. And so there is a more, I think, nuanced understanding that the world's changing. and we have to adapt our leadership style to, what's going on right now. By the way, very difficult to command in an environment with social media. Very difficult. I mean, you really think about all the audiences, and how quickly things can go south on you on Facebook or Twitter, so it really takes a very engaged, very deliberate, very thoughtful kind of command strategy, if you will.
That's such a great answer, Lori, about talking about how the workforce is changing, so the leadership must change. And what I would just add to it, in agreeing exactly with what you said, is the workforce is changing, and the pace of change has just gotten so much faster. If I were going to use one characteristic for the leader of today, and I see this even in the boardroom as I sit on a public company board, and it just is, it's also true for board members, it's true for executive leadership on the management side, it's true for all kinds of leaders everywhere. You got to be a learning leader. I guess I'll call it learning leader, or with a growth mindset, that what made you successful 5-10 years ago, or even perhaps right now we see with the pandemic and George Floyd, what made you successful 2 years ago is not what makes you successful today. And unless you have that mindset and you're ready and aware and willing and welcoming to learn and to adjust your style, you're not going to be successful. There's some great input being put on the chat. I understand that some of our audience here is very aware of the Center for Advanced Operational Culture Learning. I guess this is, I was not aware of it. I'm learning about it from the comments here. That is the Marine Corps Center of Excellence for Operational Culture and Language Familiarization. Are you familiar with that yourself? They're talking about some reports and things that are available from this organization.
Yeah, the KACL is was created back when we were really trying to understand that whole culture that we were dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan, the religion, and how to teach Marines how to work effectively in different environments. Mm-hmm. And so that's the work that KACL did. They also did some work for us in the, it's just a bunch of really smart research folks, and they did some work for us in the wake of Marines United about, the Marine Corps culture and whether it was ready to move from, aware to focus to progressive, right? So vis-a-vis, women in the Marine Corps, they did some really groundbreaking work for us.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, participating. We are learning from the audience here. I want to now pivot. There's so much to talk about, as we said before, as you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago. There's so much to talk about, but I can see that our hour is going to soon be done here. So I want to turn our attention a little bit to 2022 and beyond. Before we do that, I want to put out the poll to ask, in general, does our audience believe that the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion will increase, decrease, or stay the same in the organization? That can be in terms of budget and resources and whatever parameters you have, but generally the focus, do we believe that it will increase, decrease, or stay the same? And of course, if you're not sure, that's okay too. But right now we have 100% are saying it's going to increase. That's great news. Because, over the years, there has been a lot of, this is a topic that has been around for a very long time. And at times, there's been even some diversity and inclusion, people call it the DEI fatigue, that has set in after a bit. But, it's been certainly up and down over the last at least, several decades. So it's not a new topic. But of course, with George Floyd, as you said, with the pandemic, with just the nature of work changing, it has taken on a new level of significance. And some people worry, and the champions and the allies worry that this may go away. But it looks like we've left the poll up here for a bit, and it seems like everybody believes that the focus will increase, which is really great news. I appreciate that. What do you think, Lori? Do you think that as we look to 2022, what are the key challenges in the U.S. and globally for DEI and the way we work, and how do we keep the momentum up?
Yeah, I think I certainly hope that it increases. From a DoD perspective, Sonia, I would just say that Congress has a role to play here in making sure that we are building a truly diverse force that represents the American people. That is what we should be building in DoD. Representing American values, that is to say, all of our values wherever we go. And top-down leadership is really important here, but also I think, as I see, the Marine Corps looking hard at the mission and how we have to adapt the Marine Corps for a different mission and where we are right now. So we call it strategic competition where we are right now. So think, how are we going to compete with China and Russia? And I'll just tell a quick story here, Sonia, because I think it's really illustrative of how we have to change the language around DEI to focus on mission and people. The Commandant had all of his generals, and he showed us this, really, Hollywood quality commercial that the PLA Navy had put together. It's world class. It's a Chinese, carrier at sea, and it's, imagine the cinematography and the music. It was just amazing. And this elevator comes up, and there's, really hard charging, Han Chinese sailors come chopping out, and they're in formation. They look smart. And the Commandant said, "Guys, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, so that's how we're going to win. Because look at them. They all look the same. They are all built the same. They're taught to think the same. They're never going to think outside the box because they will get schwacked when they do. The way we win is you let them continue to look like that. We win because we are building thinkers that represent all of American values, and you give left and right lateral limits, and you say, go get the mission done." Mm. And you don't lock diversity up in the northwest corner of your country. You embrace it and say, that's our strength. That's our mission. And if we don't change the language around diversity, equity, and inclusion in DoD to be about that's how you build a powerful, representative, warfighting organization that represents all American values. That's what we should be talking about. And then you teach that from the beginning. Then you have respect, in those formations where people see the value that each of us brings. And you don't grow up people thinking, am I good enough? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I if there was one thing that I could change, Sonia, about how we talk about diversity, equity, it would be that. Mm-hmm. Focus on the mission. Focus on what those women were able to do. They added value to an infantryman. They could have done his job if they needed to, but they didn't have to. They were there to do a specific job. So we just got to get the language around this right. Mm-hmm. And it starts at the deck plate level. Sorry, that's my thought.
No, I think it's a couple of comments here saying that it's so wise. They agree with you, ma'am, on your comments here. We have a couple of interesting comments. One says that it reminds them of the Cold War approach to the Soviets. They were all the same and were trained to follow orders. They were not trained to think. And of course, we know how that turned out. And then another one that says external changes are moving faster than internal adaptations to the change, which is unfortunately a lot of times the case. But successful organizations and great leaders, not just good leaders, great leaders, try and skate to where, as another great said, skate to where the puck is going to be, right? Even be ahead of the change and see where it's heading, or at least be with it and not fall behind that change. So I think these are excellent comments. I think we have just a few minutes, so we're going to try and go, answer a couple more questions. Meanwhile, the certification information is coming up. But before we do that, I also want to just take a minute and invite everyone to check on our page, our office.io/events, as we will put up the calendar for 2022 coming up very soon, certainly before end of the year, and be planning for that. Our first one in January will be in the last part of the January timeframe, so the third or fourth week. So we will be publishing the whole calendar this year. We're trying to do that ahead of time. And then also I want to just let everyone know there's lots of ways beyond these webinar series that you can benefit from other things that we provide to the community. All of this is just complimentary. It's a way to just give back to the community. We are featured in different DI reports by key industry players like Deloitte, Mercer, Manage HR Magazine that you can access and learn about DI best practices in the market. Also, please check our blogs. We have roundtables that are, of course, invite only, or you can submit to be accepted into them, ebooks and so on. You can always go to ouroffice.io and check any of these. And as a webinar attendee, you can always, write us and ask for a free 30-minute advisement session to talk about your specific situation. If that's helpful, write us at dei@ouroffice.io. With that, let us go here and just answer some questions. The SHRM credit information is here, the activity code. I think we have one key question, a couple key questions here, if we may. Lori, one says, what do you think the leadership, let me see, what can be done to help young team leaders foster respect and cohesion? So again, what can be done to help young team members, leaders to foster respect and cohesion among their team members?
Yeah, I think certainly the answer to that is that whole idea of, really understanding that the conversation that we were having earlier about, what does it take for each of your Marines to show up in formation at 6 o'clock in the morning? Well, go home with that person, in your head, understand, that not everybody is, has the same, struggles. And because I just we don't teach that. We don't. I think the earlier that we can get that into our young lieutenants, our young leaders, the degree of difficulty discussion is, I think, essential early on.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Sometimes they'll, well, how do I figure that out? I don't know what they're thinking, right? I mean, I try, but in the surveys, our surveys look good, but at the same time, I know we're not meeting everybody's needs equally. So I always tell them, if you can't find out, then that's a big problem, right? Figure out, your job as a leader is, you're responsible for the people. You should be a servant leader, right? Think of what it takes. It's not their job to take it upon themselves to figure out ways, through the maze of especially larger organizations or even in small organizations where it's, difficult sometimes to make a point that, of a unique need that somebody has, because they may feel too embarrassed or self-conscious or just don't want to bother the leader. So it's really the leader's job. I think it's decided, of course, both sides have a responsibility, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't happen, the buck stops with the leader, and the leader has to figure it out.
Sonia, it's about building trust, right? Yes. So as a, how are you as a junior leader building trust with those you're leading? Mm-hmm. In all facets, like, how are you doing it? Because you got to do it one way or the other.
Yeah.
So, and it's essential, certainly from a warfighting organization where you may have to send those people into conflict, you better have their trust or they're not going. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. Very well said. Very well said. It's all about trust. So I want to end just with 30 seconds about your plans, ma'am. Where are you heading? I'm so excited to see what else you're going to do now.
Me too. I don't know, Sonia. Here's what I know. I want to not go to somebody else's office for a while. So I'm gonna try to figure this out on my own right now. But I'll tell you, this conversation this is my passion. is this is work that is unfinished in the Marine Corps because there's so much more work to do. And so, I just really think that we can do anything in our nation if we figure this out. We got all the tools available if we just know how to use them. And I just really think it's essential that we get this right.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's the strength of this great United States of America, which I've had the honor to serve, and I of course you have. I want to once again thank you for your service. I think this is really a huge differentiator for us as a nation.
It is.
From our history and our diversity, and how we attract so many more diverse people every day. And we should welcome them, be mindful of their needs, and do our best to accommodate them so that we can be even greater. Thank you again, ma'am. I can't thank you enough. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure that we'll do this again down the line. But all the best to you, and thank you for our audience for your active engagement. There have been some questions we weren't able to answer. Please, we'll leave this up for just 30 seconds so you can put in your email if you want us to get back with you with answers to all the questions. There were just too many to answer here. But thanks again.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was fun.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.